Hello and welcome. You're listening to Bye Bay Plastic, a podcast where we rethink how we can deal with plastic waste in the Bay Area. I am Chris from Hong Kong.
I'm Naomi from Japan.
And I am Pelle from the Netherlands.
And we are your hosts from Minerva Schools at KGI, an undergraduate program based in San Francisco. In our 3-episode series, we delve into plastic recycling, plastic separating, and plastic upcycling, where we interview experts and present our research in the field. Hello and welcome again to our 3-episode series of Bye Bay Plastic. In 2003, San Francisco set an ambitious goal: 2020, zero waste. Recology, San Francisco's recycling facility, would have to recycle all of its collective waste and send nothing to landfill. With the deadline now passed, San Francisco stands at an 80% recycling rate. Impressive, but their goals are overly ambitious. One of the biggest challenges is plastic waste. The material is of low market value, it is often contaminated, and it comes in large quantities and varieties. Plastic contaminates fresh water sources locally. Some of it is shipped to Southeast Asia, where it causes massive public health and environmental consequences. And by 2050, the amount of plastic in the ocean will outnumber the amount of fish. So how can we rethink our lives and behavior to reduce our plastic disposal? In this podcast, we look at solutions in 3 aspects: recycling plastic ourselves, separating our waste better, and reusing plastic as useful material.
In today's first episode, we will be discussing recycling at home as a solution towards zero waste. Recycling means that you bring back waste into a cycle of materials. There are 7 broad categories of plastic, indicated by numbers on whatever plastic object you find. Some types of plastic are hard to recycle, or become hard to recycle when mixed with other materials, like a yogurt bucket with a metal holder. Or plastic bags. People throw them in the recycling bin in the hope that it can be recycled. This so-called wish cycling leads to problems in recycling factories, where the bags get stuck in the machines and cannot really be separated. Currently, recycling plastic chemically is most often not economically viable, except for some hard plastics, when selling it as a sustainable option. We will discuss an innovative solution that might help recycle other types of plastic as well, like these plastic bags. And if we find ways to recycle part of our waste at home, we can take some pressure off our recycling facilities. Would we be able to, for example, compost plastic like we do with food scraps, to degrade these difficult or mixed materials into smaller parts? But first, let's ask our fellow students what they already know about recycling.
Hello, it's Chris again, and I'm here with Pelle at Minerva's Residence Hall in downtown San Francisco to interview some of our fellow students, or who we refer to as Minervans. They are from over 40 different countries, and we are lucky to have in our podcast representatives from Belarus, Indonesia, Egypt, and other very cool countries. Okay, first question. What plastic do you usually throw away?
I guess milk gallon jugs technically are plastic, or things that cover like pastries I buy at Trader Joe's.
Wrapping around my fruits or plastic bags that I get fruits in.
Like plastic boxes, plastic wrappers.
That's upsetting. From takeout containers, packages of food.
Yogurt cups, yoga pants packages.
Bottles and plates.
Second question. What percentage of garbage do you think is being recycled currently in San Francisco?
40%?
Let's say 25%. I can't be more optimistic than that.
50%.
I would go for 47.
30%.
70%.
Question 3. Why do you think plastic is particularly bad for the environment?
I don't know much about the environment, but from what I've heard, plastic is bad, especially for oceans, because it gets stuck in the fish and the coral reefs and all of those things. And it's also not biodegradable, which means that it lasts for a long time.
I did the whole thing about microplastics because you don't see them and therefore you can't really recycle them.
It's really one-ended. It's not part of circular economy in which we're like reusing the things in the same resources, but it's just like people get it, throw it out.
Final question. Do you think we should stop using plastic at all, or continue using it but find better ways to recycle it?
Yeah, in Indonesia we use banana leaves, they work just fine.
We could do this in two ways. One, we should probably look at better ways of producing plastics, maybe things that are not crude oil, hopefully. Maybe we can use plant-based sources that could potentially be converted into plastics. Your plastic bag needs to last 5 days at best. It doesn't need to last 500 years.
I don't think it's possible that we would figure out at least on like a large worldwide scale. So it would be easier to just stop.
I think realistically, we can't just stop using it. We should decrease it. And at the same time, we should also find solutions to how to recycle it properly. And then at some point, we should just remove it from our lives.
Overall, it seems like Minervans are somewhat knowledgeable about the problem of plastic waste, but they all seem to be pessimistic because all of them underestimate San Francisco's 80% recycling rate. Now let's have Naomi tell us more about this.
Just as these Minerva students spending their semester in San Francisco have been experiencing, San Francisco is one of the most successful cities among the world in recycling. Just to make sure with the terminology, recycling is to collect, process, and convert materials that would otherwise be thrown away as garbage into new products and materials. Currently, the city diverts about 80%, or 1.5 million tons of its wastes, to recycling and composting annually. This is far more than the national statistics presented by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, in which only 32.1% is avoided from being sent to landfills or incineration. What has been leading San Francisco to its waste is the zero waste policy adopted in 2003, aiming to diminish waste to zero by 2020 through recycling and composting. Though the goal has not been fully achieved, the mayor recently updated the goal to reduce landfill generation by half, as well as to cut total generation of all waste materials by 15% by 2030, with the ambitious vision to make zero waste a reality. Some do view this goal with skepticism, claiming that it is a visionary concept. For example, a case study by Zaman, who claims that 100% diversion rate is not possible in the current forms of production, consumption, and waste management systems. But maybe I'm actually very positive that it's still early for us to say it's impossible. I mean, I don't think it's difficult to remember the last time you threw away a plastic bag, or a tray, or a straw in the wrong bin. We can do better, right? We'll now take you on a journey to explore the known and the unknowns of plastic recycling and how we can deal better with them at home, starting with a tour to Spain with my co-host Pelle.
We take you to the green hills of northern Spain. If you take one glance at the Cantabria province, you would imagine yourself in Ireland. High cliffs, cloudy, drusing, sheep everywhere. Maybe this is the reason for ancient Celtic influences in this region. Federica Bertoncini, a biologist at the local university, was working in her garden. The bees were buzzing and the sun peeking through. She discovered that the beehive in the back of her yard was being attacked by waxworms who crawled their way in to eat the beeswax. They huddled up in the hexagonal chambers where normally the bee larvae grow. From there, they eat their way out, nibbling away at the very structure of the beehive. Federica, annoyed, removed the waxworms from her hive, placing them in a plastic bag to throw them out. By now it was afternoon, and this means, of course, it was time for siesta. The day grew longer, and when she returned to continue her work in the garden, she noticed something strange. The bag she had left near the trash container now had small holes in it. Being a biologist, she was fascinated. Did the bugs really just eat their way out of the bag? Like most plastic bags, this one was made from polyethylene, maybe the most simple polymer in chemistry, a chain of carbon surrounded by hydrogen atoms. Beeswax has a similar backbone of carbon with other structures attached to it. To the wax moths, the polyethylene bags were like the vegan version of beeswax. Federica, excited, went back to her lab and started experimenting on these creatures that are a common species across the globe. How come these little bugs could digest plastic? They thought it might be their gut bacteria. To test this, they gathered some dead wax moths, put them in some water and let them decease. When they put plastic in the substance, they found that it was still being broken down. So it wasn't just the worms that did the digesting. The bacteria that had escaped the gut were now digesting the plastic. Somehow, it was the combination of the wax moth providing the ideal circumstances for the bacteria and the bacteria's enzymes co-working to digest the plastic.
Well, thank you, Pelle, for bringing us to the green hills of northern Spain. So, what are plastic eating bugs? Are plastics their main meal? And will they be our ultimate solution to landfills, plastic-filled oceans, and endangering of wildlife? To this date, more than 50 species of plastic-eating organisms, or plastivores, have been found out according to the Discover magazine. While most of these plastivores are bacteria and fungi, scientists are now attracted by the caterpillar larva of the Galerium melanella, also known as the greater wax moth. If you're an insect mania, you may have recognized them as bee pests that live off munching on the beehives. Surprisingly, beehives and plastic bags serve as equivalent nutritional sources to the wax moths, both consisting of long chains of hydrocarbon. Wax moths are known to eat and digest polyethylene, which is the main type of plastic used in single-use bags, at a rate of 2 milligrams a day. This means that to rule out the 123,000 tons of plastic bags thrown away in California each year, approximately 5,578 billion wax moths would be needed. A jaw-dropping number and not a pleasant sight to imagine, but truly intriguing. This isn't the only drawback of seeing wax moth as our savior. These beehive-eating moths can potentially eradicate bees, which play key roles in pollinating for crop cultivation, leaving humans in great trouble. So, have we already reached a dead end? Not quite. A research group at the Brandon University in Canada has found out that these wax moths work in collaboration with the bacteria in their guts to decompose plastics. Each can eat plastics on its own, but plastic degradation gets accelerated when they work together. Scientists in Japan have also identified bacteria that consumes another type of plastic used to make bottles for soft drinks. These bacteria and the enzymes that plastic-eating moths own in their bodies may potentially become the breakthrough of our plastic reduction. In the next section, my co-hosts Chris and Pelle will have a conversation to ideate on how these bugs can possibly munch plastic for us at homes.
Thank you, Naomi, for the introduction to plastic-eating bugs. In this section, I'll be chatting with Pelle about these little plastic munchers. Hey Pelle, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you. How are you?
I'm good. Obviously, this is still very new technology. I mean, 10 years ago, we still thought we'd have to wait 500 years for a plastic bag to decompose naturally. But this opens the door to a possibility where we can accelerate the process. Now, the problem is, how can we scale this up to a point where you and I, average people live in the Bay Area, can make use of this to reduce our plastic output?
Yeah, when I hear how you describe it, I think of the composting heap in my grandmother's backyard. What if instead of our carrots, eggshells and leftover greens, we would just throw out our plastic bags on that heap? And the bugs could do the rest of the work for us, munching on the plastic to break it into its smaller parts.
Imagine after having dinner, you could just chuck your food waste in one bin and your plastic in another. They're like little factories out in your backyard. But as Naomi mentioned already, there are constraints to how this can possibly work at a home. Two things that come to mind is first, we need to keep these bugs very, very secure, because if too many of them escape, they can cause problems to bee populations in our ecosystem here. Second thing is we'll need a lot of them, and by that I mean a lot of them, and that's where the balance comes in. We want to maximize the amount of plastic that can be processed, but we also want the right amount of them to know we can keep them secure.
Yeah, so I did a little estimation, and plastic-eating bugs, they mainly eat polyethylene, which is like bags, wrappers, mostly soft plastics, or like plastic bottles. And you will see this in food packaging, for example. And if we take a person's average daily production of these items, and we would let it be composted by bugs, we would need to sustain 17,000 bugs per person year-round. Everyone would need half a bathtub full of bugs to digest only these plastics. And especially in cities with a lack of space, this might pose a problem.
Apart from the logistics, we also need to consider how we can market this as a potential product. Think about the technological adoption lifecycle consisting of innovators on one end, then the early adopters, and finally the majority. The chasm in the early adopters is really what we're interested in. If a hypothetical PEB installation at home can get past a certain threshold of adoption rate, then it has the potential to be distributed widely.
Yeah, to appeal to a Bay Area audience, especially the high-end tech fanatics who are risk-seeking enough to be the first batch of adopters of these bugs, we can look at how they can generate value beyond simply being like composting worms.
So my brother has been working on his saltwater aquarium at our home in Hong Kong. He's learning how to design the aquarium, the lighting, the layout of the coral and rocks, the colors, you name it. And the point is, when the aquarium is up and running, he can then just enjoy it. What if we can generate this kind of aesthetic value also from PEB?
Yeah, I'm thinking who would be interested in this. Like maybe your biology teacher in high school, and the bugs can be a way to teach children about plastic and plastic pollution. And apart from selling the bugs themselves, we can have add-on services like designing a good-looking mini forest in a tank where the bugs live. Or we could add a plastic grinder to make small plastic particles, a bit like a coffee grinder, so that the bugs can actually eat the smaller parts. They could be like the bug feeds, and people can spend their evenings just looking at the bugs wiggle and twiggle.
I guess not only can plastic-eating bugs revolutionize household recycling, it can also revolutionize entertainment and leisure. Now, at this point, we're just two university freshmen romanticizing what these little buggers can do. What do we hear what an expert has to say? We're lucky to have Professor Susan Kern, the head of the Natural Science College in Minerva Schools at KGI, to share her thoughts on the future of plastic-eating bugs. She specializes in the field of microbiology, particularly bacterial metabolism and bioenergy, and I think she's the perfect person to talk to.
I am the head of the College of Natural Sciences. I've been a professor at Minerva for a number of years, and my research background before coming to Minerva was in bacterial metabolism. And in particular, I was studying bacteria that can use things that are other than oxygen as oxidants to power their metabolism. So we eat food, we have to breathe, they can effectively breathe other things. And at Minerva now, I teach courses in pretty much all of the years, from the introductory first year courses all the way to totally specialized topics with seniors.
How do you see plastic-eating bugs working as biorecyclers?
So I'm thinking that if the goal is to basically decompose plastics, what we need is something that has the ability to carry out the necessary reactions. And if we can find the right biology that has enzymes, which are catalysts, things that can speed up a reaction, that happen to take in plastic as their food or as their substrate, then that's a way forward with basically having bugs of all sizes and shapes and metabolisms being able to help out in this way.
In our heads, plastic-eating bugs seem like an ideal cure-all for all the plastic problems that we have. And so what are some of the pitfalls that we have to consider before this rolls out as a real solution?
Yeah, it's good to have a couple thought experiments here. So for example, if you had a place where you were trying to recycle your plastic or degrade your plastic so that it turns into something else that you can do something with, then you have to think about what happens if like a little blob of this stuff gets out onto some of the plastics you don't want to degrade, and how are you controlling what is available to be digested. So containment is a huge thing, and if you were to choose, say, bacteria or fungi, they can exist in hundreds, thousands, millions before you can see them with the naked eye. And so you wouldn't know that they've made an escape. It's not like, a kangaroo has left the zoo. We can absolutely see that. We would not necessarily see that the plastic eating organisms have escaped their little container. So that would be a major concern. And there are ways around it, which is good. But that, I think, would be your top thing to pay attention to.
So I feel like this relates to the last question, but how do you think these concerns, you mentioned containment as one of the concerns, but how do you think this can be addressed, and would things like gene editing or environmental control would come in to play a role in solving these problems?
Right, a really good question. You can imagine creating a perfect environment, a perfect habitat for the things that you want to cultivate that are doing this very important set of reactions. And they're equipped to only do those reactions and really only survive if they stay in that perfect environment. So that might be temperature, that might be moisture, that might be the nutrients you provide. Another thing that can happen that you can do in bioengineering is to create some sort of dependency. So you create a requirement for this organism to stay put because you're feeding it something it can't get anywhere else. And if it doesn't get that, it can't keep living. Or that it always has to be surrounded by some certain environment, and if it's not, it self-destructs. So there are ways to code that in to genes according to the organism. You pick the right sort of thing. For example, you would engineer an antibiotic resistance gene into an organism, and then you treat your growth environment with that antibiotic. And then only the things that carry the gene for antibiotic resistance should be growing in that environment. So it creates an appropriate selective environment for the thing you're trying to cultivate.
From the brief research we did in the past, apart from worms, we also found that certain fungi, enzymes, or bacteria can also be biorecyclers for plastic. And so, which organism do you think is currently the most promising in solving our plastic problem?
I'm not sure I know enough to play favorites, but it's cool to have some thought experiments in mind. So we have enzymes to thank in all cases. These are the things that help us carry out reactions outside of high temperature and pressure and other things that can otherwise make the reactions go forward. So enzymes are responsible for the bacteria that can do this, the fungi that can do this, the worms that can do this. And sometimes you get symbioses. So you get these organisms living together. So I could imagine, but I actually don't know, that you might be able to create some sort of ecosystem, some environment that is associated with the worms or other things that carry this out. In terms of what would be most user-friendly in a household environment, I'm also not sure. Worms are much easier to spot if they've gotten out. They're a little bit closer to the kangaroo than the invisible bacteria and fungi. So in a sense, those might be preferable for making sure that you don't have plastic-eating things eating the wrong plastic.
Is there any knowledge on how much you can improve kind of an efficiency of a reaction by improving these enzymes? Is there sort of a limit there?
There is certainly a limit. I can imagine a series of challenges. So one of the things we might do with bacteria is repeatedly take samples out of a particular environment and put the current set of survivors into a fresh environment and then let them grow up again. Over time, because of the quick lifespan of these organisms, you can go through many, many generations to basically select for the things that are best equipped to do the thing you're trying to do. You could conceivably do this with plastics as well. And then oftentimes what happens is you take a look at what are the enzymes and what are the differences from when we started this series of basically evolution experiments to the end. And does that tell us anything? Can we pinpoint one or two enzymes that have undergone, maybe they're more active, maybe there's a structural change, and then you can use that to maybe intentionally bioengineer some other things.
So most of the organisms that we know digest plastic, digest polyethylene, but these plastics often can already be recycled by normal recycling facilities. Do you think we should focus more on non-recyclable plastics?
Well, in terms of addressing the broad issue of plastic pollution and everything, it seems to me that if we've got good recycling solutions in some area, it's going to be most impactful to keep focusing on new areas. Plastic bags are just so tricky to deal with. So the nice thing about them from the perspective of a microbe, which is how I tend to think about the world, there's a ton of surface area, which means there's a lot of accessible points for contacting the plastic and potentially digesting it and whatever. So it does seem to me that plastic bags might be an interesting place to prioritize this type of approach. That said, it all comes down to what enzymes are available, what things are going to be able to chew and digest the particular plastics we have.
What about, for example, PVC or styrofoam? Are those areas that they might provide useful in?
Definitely hard for me to guess at. There may be some good information about how hard or easy it is for folks to find things that can decompose these items. Yeah, it just comes down to what their chemistry is.
If these obstacles that we mentioned above, like containment or efficiency of the plastic-eating bugs, do you think there's a possibility that these bugs will be munching on plastic at our homes anytime soon in the next decade or so?
Maybe? I don't know. I think that would be really quite cool. The easiest solution to me for an at-home use purpose, I imagine, would be if it could be incorporated into compost bins. But in the end, I'm not sure if that would actually work because plastics are really inaccessible as food sources. The scraps from dinner are probably a much more appealing food source. And so will you get them to actually eat that plastic when there's all this other yummy stuff that's much easier to digest? They get a lot more energy out of it.
So we might imagine something like sprinkling some sort of material, little balls of chemical compounds that activate these bugs in your compost, like every time you throw something plastic in.
Right, that sort of thing could totally work. I'm not very good at taking care of plants, but I've learned that they definitely need some fertilizer, and those little balls of fertilizer that you kind of make sure are in the soil so that they release a little bit each time you water. That's a really friendly way to go. That could be a sort of similar model, or maybe you have a dropper with some liquid and you spray that in, and that's how you activate the right metabolism or the right organisms. Yet to be seen. People are clever.
Okay, thank you. A lot of the research that focuses on these bugs focuses more on microplastics targeted at environmental solutions as a sort of cleanup warriors. Throw them in your nature reserve and they get rid of all the plastic that's polluting it. Would that be maybe a more obvious direction? Are we just headed in the wrong direction by thinking we should apply it at home?
Well, I would be reluctant to go looking at, sprinkling bacteria in the ocean. Plastics are really difficult because they are solid and they're going to be outside any given cell. We don't worry about this too much. When we eat food, we just take it into our mouths, it goes into our stomachs, it gets digested. But if we're bacteria, think you're a single cell and you are much, much smaller than this thing you're trying to eat. And so you have to start thinking about what are the ways that the organism can digest externally and then take in the very small pieces that feed into their metabolism. All that is to say, there may be some organisms out there that are doing this already. It's a tricky space. I'm kind of more of a fan of this idea of plastic bags being digested by these things, and then we never get microplastics in the first place.
What if we have these worms? Could these escape since they are the natural enemy of bees, for example? Is that a danger? Like, what if we all have compost bins with tons of worms and these fly out and destroy all our bees?
Yeah, this is the challenge of the complex systems of ecosystems. You can end up with some unexpected consequences. So it's good to be thinking in that direction. I don't know if that one would really be the competitive displacement or not. Again, if you're providing a food source and it's good enough for an organism, that may make them very content in that particular habitat, and they're ill-equipped to go into other habitats or challenge other organisms. So it might be okay, but you'd really have to look through all those details.
It could even be some sort of domestication. Like if you put a domesticated bear in the wild, they don't survive.
Mm-hmm. Or the kangaroo that escapes from the zoo. It's not going far. Hopefully you catch it and bring it back to safety if it's not anywhere near its natural habitat.
Thank you so much. I think this was all. This was so interesting.
Fun. All right. Well, thank you all so much. And it was great to talk with you all. See you again.
Overall, these plastic digesting creatures seem promising. Could they one day be munching on plastic in a bin next to the compost heap? Or maybe even in the same bin? If we are able to genetically modify them or create optimal conditions for them to thrive on our plastic, maybe. However, we must find ways to control these creatures, domesticize them or confine them safely, since they might otherwise be an ecological time bomb. It is not clear for what kinds of plastic they would be best employed. Microplastics in wastewater, plastic grocery bags, a mix of all hard to recycle and mixed materials plastics. All this does prompt us to think about the types of plastic we use. Do you have a lot of packaging that has to go to the landfill bin, like plastic bags or wrappers because they cannot be recycled by Recology? Find alternatives to these kinds and replace them with hard plastics. Or if you feel like a bioengineer yourself, find your own plastic digesting creature in your nearby trash bin. The key to all our problems might be grazing there.
That's it for this episode. Thank you for listening. If you like this podcast, you can leave us a review in the comment section. If you have any questions or thoughts about the episode, you can shoot us an email to the addresses linked in the description. Thank you and bye.